Today, we are zooming out and looking forward. Yep, we're going to get out of some of the day-to-day weeds of being accountants and being firm owners, and are going to talk about what's going on in the larger economic environment, what it may mean for our firms and for our clients. And very, very thankfully, we have a friend here who actually spends her time studying this, because otherwise, if it was just me and Matthew, we'd be making some pretty wild ass predictions that would probably make no sense. We're doing all that here today on Drink While You Think, the happy hour conversation between a couple of guys who are building their firm in really weird ways. I'm your host, Kenji, along with my trusty co-host, Matthew. Matthew, who is our sponsor today?
Drink While You Think today is sponsored by Gusto. Gusto, the preferred app of all accountants for all accounting, HR, and payroll needs. Gusto.
Matthew loves leaning in and doing his sponsor announcement. But let's move beyond that.
That's sponsor voice.
That's sponsor voice. I love sponsor voice, Matthew. But let's move beyond that and introduce everyone to our friend Liz, who is here. Liz, we are so pumped to have you here. Tell us about you and what you're doing and what you're drinking today.
Yeah. Hey, y'all. Thanks, Kenji and Matt, for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Like I said earlier, when, my colleagues approached me about doing this, I was like, Kenji's awesome. I'll talk about anything with Kenji. So I'm really glad to be here. I am the principal economist at Gusto. I empower a team called the Gustonomics team. And yeah, we totally call it that for real. But we sort of take all the data on the platform and all the data that's out in the world, and we do a bunch of like economic analysis and future of work stuff, like what's happening in the economy and in the environment, and really bringing that down to the on the ground view, like what does that mean for businesses that we serve, right? We serve over 200,000 small businesses and accountants who serve businesses, and big companies can afford like teams of economists, and we're like, we can do that right for our partners so that they can like have that intelligence too. So like that's sort of what I do in a nutshell. And today I am drinking Trogs. I had to look up how to pronounce this brewery, which I think is well known and loved by beer nerds, but I thought it was Tregs, but it's Trogs. Haze Charmer, which is a mild session IPA, which is quite nice. I'm not really like an IBU person myself, but I have really enjoyed this.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a good one. Okay. I'd like that. Matthew probably wouldn't be crazy about that. He's not a huge IPA person. I'd probably enjoy that. Okay. Like that. Matthew, what about you? What do you got today?
I'm going with Stone's Imperial Stout. It's kind of a heavy duty one, 10.5%. So it's a little chilly in Atlanta today. So going with that one. And I brought a glass Kenji today. So you'd be not annoyed by me, just so you guys can see how.
So fancy.
It is fancy. It is
No,
fancy.
normally Kenji is the only one with the glass. So I thought I'd be fancy today because Liz was here.
I just opened my beer and it spilled all over my office. That's great. That's awesome. I'm drinking the Bold Monk Chant. That's a local one here in town. It's a lager, a little bit lighter. It's 5.4%. See, that's how you do the pour, Matthew. Look at that. And I went lighter alcohol on this one just because Matthew and I are still recovering from some jet lag. I'm trying to figure out what day it is. So I don't know. I thought lighter beer would help. He went heavier. But cheers, friends. Glad to have everybody on here. Cheers.
Cheers. See, he has like the real glasses like you're supposed to drink beer out of. It's
not
just
a very fancy snifter. And here I am, like a uncultured person without a glass or anything.
Oh, Liz. Okay,
I normally drink out of the can. I just because you were on, I was like, oh, it's a special occasion, so I brought a glass down.
We classed it up, I'll tell you for sure. All right, well, let's get into it. And I do want to go back and mention something. I think that something you said, Liz, I think is super cool, and maybe a little nerdy but I mean, as partners, like Gusto is giving us as partners like our own economics team to lean on. I think that's really important and really cool, because you're right. This is something that's only like Fortune 500 and big billion-dollar companies have, and these are things that like come up with clients who want our opinion on things in the economy. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, maybe I'll try to listen to Bloomberg or something tomorrow morning before I talk to you again, but I don't have any idea. So I think I love what the Gustonomics team is doing. And I'm excited about that. We'll talk more about, I think, what people can expect that what that help is going to look like for a lot of firm owners. But I got a chance to meet you and hear you speak at Gusto Next, which was, a month or two ago. And there's something really stood out to me in your presentation. And I guess it was at the very end. And I think you finished with this question of saying, why is everything so crazy pants right now? Right? You're like, it's just crazy. And I guess the only probably, 6-8 weeks since it's been Gusto Next, I feel like it's only gotten like kind of crazier. I don't know. Maybe that's how we always feel about things, but I don't know. In short, like why is everything so crazy? Like inflation is kind of going nuts, and talks of recession and labor issues. It's a big, broad statement, the whole crazy pants thing. But like, are we still in crazy pants time?
Yeah, I mean, I will say the thing is, like, a lot of churn has like happened in 6 to 8 weeks. Like a lot of news has come out. I still think that, like, by and large, crazy pants is an appropriate term to use here. I think we're still in crazy pants. And I think I also said, like, buckle up. It's going to be a ride to get through this. And for the folks that weren't there, I also actually asked our like design team to draw like a gigantic cartoon snake, eating a very large animal. I think it was a cow or something. And I still think that that's like applicable here to think about, what's going on. The economy is really like still processing through all of the changes that happened because of COVID. Everybody went home. A bunch of people lost their jobs. Leisure and hospitality still hasn't fully recovered from the pandemic, and like a bunch of jobs that we didn't have before in like transportation and warehousing and healthcare and all of that, like really amped up. So the economy just like had this like big thing happen to it. And it's, still trying to sort of sort through all of those things. And I think, we're looking forward, we've got inflation now, and looking forward in the next 12 to 18 months, like that whole transition is going to take years, and I think it's going to feel a little uncertain until we do that. And so that was sort of the motivating reason for launching The Economy Explained, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which is, like 3-month-old data or like 6-month-old data or year-old data just like doesn't have the same staying power that it used to. And really not just having the data, but like making sense of it in that like big context, and then thinking about what that like means for real people trying to make real decisions. Like, do I make an investment here? Do I make this big decision? Do I make this big leap? Do I not? Is like really sort of what's important. Like the closer you can get to the data and try and make sense of it, like the better, like the more able you are to just like make an informed decision, right? Like it could go any way, but like make the best decision that you can given the like environment that we have. But yeah, I think crazy pants is still like a reasonably good way to describe where we're at.
So can I ask a question about I mean, I don't know historically, like what, if there's anything to compare to the amount of money the government has kind of put out in the last kind of 2 years with pandemic relief in all the different forms. Is there kind of historically ever been a time when our government has put that much out? And like, what should we think about as firm owners as what are going to be the ramifications, or what's the best guess, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, so the best guess, and I don't think there's a recently applicable example, right, that we can sort of look to. I think people are talking a lot about like the inflation of the 1970s, but there's sort of a different environment and context. And so I think there are only so many like takeaways from that. But you're right, Matt, we pumped a bunch of money into the economy so that people who had lost their jobs, wouldn't starve, right? And we also stopped, collections on certain types of debts, right? So that people, who had been impacted, and, I think the government at the time was really trying to just like do things to help protect people in this crisis environment. And so the lasting impact of that, to your point, is that we have a bunch of money in the economy and we've got lots and lots of demand, and, supply chains that can't keep up, and, jobs that still have to be resorted. So I've heard the expression that it's kind of like putting a big shop vac suction on a very tiny little straw to try and drink an extra thick milkshake, right? Like it's it's a very constrained process that we're sort of trying to work through. And I think, and that's what's causing, right, all that inflation. So the Fed, has been hiking up interest rates to try and cool demand. And we know from a bunch of economic research that it typically takes 1.5 to 2 years to really level out, right, that inflation for that action to sort of like spread throughout the economy. And, I think for firms, what that means is like, you're going to sort of get squeezed on both ends, right? Like your costs are going up. You might have limited ability to pass those costs right onto your customers. And then to make things like, extra nutty, right? Like extra spicy. You sort of often think about like a tough economic environment as being like, well, at least we have good talent candidates, right? And like people are worried about losing their jobs, but like that's not happening either. So like every time I hear from a firm, it's like retention. We cannot like keep people in our business and we can't find good people. And so I think, businesses are having a tough time on both sides, which is, I think that's really the odd part, is like, we're in this sort of tough environment where inflation is, really pressing people, but also like talent's really hard to keep, planning for a future in that scenario is like, it's tough.
It's such a weird confluence of things, right? It is very strange, because I do think I've been the same way, I guess, as you mentioned, Matthew, of like, try to look for the past for like, oh, where did this happen before? And what can we learn? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not so sure. There's been many examples. I guess we're creating kind of some new example for this, but it is challenging. I'll ask a question for you, Matthew. This is a little, I won't say a little off topic, but like, I'm just thinking through all this. And we both have kids in college. So I have one, I think, who's taken an economics class. How did you do in economics, Matthew, back in college? Do you remember?
I mean, I think I only took one or two.
I think I took like one or two. Yeah.
Took macro, micro. I did. Yeah. I did really well in the non-accounting classes in
horribly.
college.
I struggled. I said this.
I was like all A's in the business school except for my accounting classes. The accounting classes were really hard.
Yeah, it was like I was a generally good student. Economics, like I don't know why. I struggled. I got a C in it, like, and I had to fight like tooth and nail. Anyway, it's funny now.
I was good. I was good in those classes.
I couldn't wrap my head around it then, but I feel like now, for some reason, now I'm much more fascinated about it. But like as this undergrad, anyway, I was just curious about Matthew's. I mean, we obviously know how Liz did in her economics classes. I would say going on for a PhD, but I struggle with them. Something else I've heard recently, and this may be from folks talking about just about data, and you mentioned how looking back at data may not even be that helpful for how fast things are changing. Do we feel like we've got good, I mean, do you as an economist and your team, the rest of the Gustonomics team, is there enough good data out there? Is it are there parts of the economic environment we still feel like there's not good enough data, or it lags for too long to get there? Or is there too much data to sift through? Or is it some kind of combination of that? Like, there's a lot of data out there, but I've heard there are parts that are like sometimes around things, like pricing and demand, feels like it's still kind of fuzzy math we're trying to get. I mean, does that pose a lot of challenges for you and the team when you're trying to pull these insights together?
Yeah, I mean, any data person will tell you that the data is never good enough, right? Like it's like not to necessarily like get too far out in the weeds, but like it's like data in itself is a compression of what the actual world is, right? So like you can never paint a full picture with data, because we always have extra questions because it's not the full world. So yes, and we actually have more data than ever before, right? So 5 years ago, you only had US government data that was anywhere between 1 year or 1 month and 1 year old, right? That you cared about. And now, Gusto has its own data visualization. We just launched another one about the extent of remote work, which I actually think is probably the number one thing, is figuring out how to get good data around remote workers is like a big gap. It's something that we need to really think through. And I think it's definitely a challenge. And obviously, nobody can measure everything because the world is complex. But I think where we have really done a great job, Gusto, but also just sort of collectively, the government and the private sector, I think have really done a good job in this environment of saying like, we've got tons of real-time data, right? We can see what's happening and we can contribute a piece of that picture, right? For people like on my Gustonomics team to sort of sort through that and try and like piece together that whole, which is never going to be a whole and complete picture.
Yeah.
And also to your point, we take pictures of the economy, the act of translating that to a business owner who runs a specific business in a specific place in a specific time is always going to be, an art and a science.
For sure. You touched on just there about remote work. And I think it took me back again to hearing you talk at Gusto Next about some of the challenges in this labor market, and how I think your recommendation, or I guess really coming from Gusto and from your team, was to really focus on retention. Matthew mentioned earlier too, focus on retention. And I think that if I remember correctly, one of the areas, when we think about maybe practical steps for other firm owners who are listening to this, or accountants listening to it, how we advise our clients, was to really try to help our clients and other accounting firms see that remote work, there is a correlate, or I guess there is a positive impact that remote work has on retention. Am I remembering that correctly, that the team found that there was some positive aspect there?
Yeah, we did. We found a positive association that's actually like pretty strong in terms of dollars. So we looked at like remote work versus non-remote workers. And we found that like after we control for like the industry you're in, or the salary that you make, or like all those other things that might affect how long you're in a job, being a remote worker is associated with a 13% reduction in the risk of quitting. Right. So like, if you want to translate that in the model I'm not going to get too in the weeds about how the model works unless you really want to, but we probably need a few more beers for that. That sort of, you basically have to pay a worker an additional $11,000 a year in salary to get the same reduction in risk that they quit. Wow. And so like these types of things are what economists call like non-money, like non-salary value, right? Parts of the job. So like the ability to work where I want, when I want, how I want, is really valuable to employees. And in fact, we can see that, there have been other research out there. We can see that employees are actually willing to, trade off some of the salary that they would otherwise get for it. And even if you don't trade off salary, increasing the level of like commitment and happiness and engagement that you're getting, especially from people who use their brains, right, to make money for the business, is a really good thing, right? And I think that's especially true for knowledge workers or creative workers. Like if your business is differentiated on the quality of service or the type of innovation, or like, some sort of knowledge-based work, having people that aren't just showing up, but that are doing that extra effort to solve problems and find ways to drive the business, like, is a really good investment. So we talked about remote work, and, we found this result. And also we actually surveyed people, and we asked them about when they accepted or rejected their last job offer. And at the time you're accepting or rejecting a job offer, right? Like you've already had the conversations about salary, you're in the right salary ballpark, and you've talked to everybody at the company. So you're like kind of okay on culture. But the number one reason why people accept and the number one reason why people reject their last job offer is like flexibility. They accept it when they believe that they'll get flexibility, and they reject it when they want more of it and they don't think that they'll be able to get it. So like those two things together are showing us a lot that like remote work is what I'm calling a high value, low cost benefit, because it doesn't really cost employers much, but it has like an outsized impact on how engaged and how much and how long they stay.
Right. In that same vein, I think you also mentioned another thing that helps, on the retention side, we're just offering benefits, if I remember. And so, yet benefits are something to where I guess I know we offer them, but I can think back to when we were smaller and thinking, oh my gosh, offering whatever it might be, healthcare or 401k, just sounded very daunting. Because I mean, to us, that was real hard cost. There are hard costs associated with that, unlike some of the remote work. But I guess even playing that out when there are maybe more costs associated, it sounds like, per at least the data that you saw, that the value is still very much there, or at least greatly outweigh the cost. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, and like I'll caveat that by saying like every business is different. But if you have an employee who's not generating as much value as you're paying them, like you're in like a different set of problems than we're really looking at, right? So I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to assume that if you care about keeping an employee, it's because they're valuable to your company.
That's probably a good
In which
thesis.
case, yeah. Yeah. In which case we also, we asked HR professionals and like people who run companies, like how much more valuable is somebody that stays at your firm, who's good, right? Who stays at your firm for 6 months versus 3 years, or 3 years versus 5 years. And over 5 years, these business owners say, like, if a good person stays with me for 5 years, they're almost twice as valuable to the company as someone who stays for 6 months. And when you think about like the value generated against like the incremental cost, like I totally get the challenge because it's upfront money, right? And that's like real dollars.
Yeah.
And the sort of value, right, out into the future takes a little while, and it might be even hard to monetize in terms of like what's the value of somebody having a great idea, right, in 2 years. And that can be difficult. What I would say that one of the reasons that I've been focusing on what think of as like a high value, low cost is that it sort of takes the pain a little bit out of, putting a ton of real dollars down. And I think what we're finding is businesses can do stuff with smaller amounts of money that are really like maximizing the value of those dollars. And one of the benefits that I'm thinking of specifically is 401k benefits. So actually after Gustonomics, we've released some research that shows that offering a 401k benefit is actually a bigger increase or like a bigger benefit for employees than even like remote work in terms of like their risk of quitting. So we found a 13% risk of quitting for remote workers specifically, and we found a 32% reduction for workers that have a 401k, which are much less expensive than health insurance. It's a much larger benefit. And actually, we think of 401k benefits as being like kind of dull benefits, right? Like retirement savings is very boring and it's finances and all that stuff. But like employees really, really value it. And we could talk about why that is. But like, again, it's not something that costs a lot of money, but it is something that employees really, really care about and that they will stay for.
Yeah, we were looking at that the other day because we had our matching portion. We were approaching where we had matched $1 million for all of our employees cumulatively over the lifetime of the plan. We were like hitting that milestone was kind of, I was like, oh, that's like actually, I understand why that makes sense to me when I think of like what the impact has been to employees from that perspective, I guess.
In our own little small sample size, I should remember this. We're using guideline through Gusto, but I mean, our participation rate in the 401k plan is incredibly
huge.
high. It's huge. It's multiple factors higher than our participation in our health plan. And that could be based on the structure of those plans, but I think also it probably has a lot to do with what's important to those individuals who participate in them. So that's interesting to hear that validated.
Well, I have a theory about that actually. 401k is totally additive and it's owned by you, right? Like if I get a 401k from you, Kenji, my employer, it doesn't matter if my spouse or my partner also gets a 401k through their employer, right? Those dollars don't cancel each other out. They just stack on top of each other. They're really tax advantaged, right? So like, they're not like any other dollars that an employer gives you, and they're mine. And I take them with me. We have a customer called Squared Away that does like employment for military spouses primarily, right? And like they're working and they've spent a ton of their career following their military spouses around, but now they're working and they have money to contribute and it's theirs, and not like anybody intends to get divorced, but things happen, right? And there's like that kind of value that it's yours, it's additive, and it has all these tax advantages, means that in some ways it's really different from a health benefit. Because if I don't get health coverage from you, Kenji, maybe my partner has it, right? Or maybe I'm still on my parents' insurance, right? Or maybe I can get a subsidy from the healthcare marketplace. There are other ways for me to get that benefit. And that's not true of 401ks, which is why they tend to, I think that they're sort of more valuable in the minds of employees.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It makes so much sense when you think of it that way. I do. I think there is a lot of power in that. It makes me feel better, in the sense of, I think, where we're trying to make changes in certain plans of like, because it's renewal time right now, of course, on healthcare, and we're seeing all the rates come through, and I'm like, I would rather do more and find some way to be advantageous in a retirement and savings plan like that I would probably go, oh, great, we're just having to deal with higher premiums over on the healthcare side. But that's an Acuity thing. Not everybody's going through that.
I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Can I do one?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Okay, Liz. So I'm in a group with 6 other firm owners, and the topic in our November meeting was about, we saw people really slowing down on the buying side. And so kind of from a macroeconomic perspective, everybody's trying to plan right now for 2023. So like, should we hire? Should we freeze hiring? Like, so what would your advice be? Like, I know you like helping us help our clients, but just for us, for our companies, for our businesses, what would your top couple of things to think about going into 2023 be for firm owners right now?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that, because I actually touched on this in Gustonomics too. We talked a lot about the labor side, but we also sort of talked about that like buying, spending side. So like, one, a reduction in buying is what the Fed is trying to do. Like, that's why it's like jacking up all those rates. And what I said it next is, one of two things is going to slow consumer demand. It is either going to be continued inflation, or it is going to be, this rise in interest rates that is slowing everything down. And I think we can expect that to like sort of come to fruition in 2023. Like, that is the plan. That is what, in fact, the Fed and the government are trying to do, is to sort of slow down this like superheated demand environment, where everything's sort of happening too fast. I think that, from a, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know when that'll happen. I don't know exactly how tough it'll be. What I do know is that every firm should be thinking about how much institutional knowledge, like how much knowledge is in their employees, and how long it would take them to build that in someone else, right? And how they can balance the risk that they overhire and then have to let people go, or, how do you preserve the things that are really valuable to your business and your people? And what is it going to take to do that? I would definitely recommend planning for a reduction in spending somewhere on the order of 10 to 15%, I think is a good benchmark to plan. Again, it could be a little over, it could be under. Nobody's forecasting anything but like a mild recession next year, if anything. So like, we need to be, I think, a little tempered in how worried we are. Like, the sky is not falling. This is a pretty normal part of like business cycle. And then I think I would say we're also like really big picture in a process of digitalization and, thinking about work and what work needs to be done. What can be contracted out that your employees don't need to take on, right? That you can have like a little more flexibility about, right, to take on or take off. Are there digital tools that your employees, right, could be using that would save them 10 hours, 20 hours, so that they could be really devoting their time and effort to the things that are driving value for the firm? And also, do you know the things that are really driving value for the firm, right? And are your employees like fully focused on that, right? I would say, moderate reductions, like now is the time to plan, but also now is the time to focus really on like the essentials and what is really driving the value for your firm, and making sure that like that is locked in.
So even taking it, beyond, I guess, Matthew's 6 firm owners, is what you just described. I think that's great. I mean, to focus there, but like, I think as more recent news, and we see, certainly it's hard to, when Elon does things at Twitter and is making huge risk layoffs there, that's a little bit like, okay, talk about on a different planet and different things happening. That's who knows what they're doing over there. But when you look at Facebook, Meta, Amazon, others who are really starting to kind of really crank down on the labor side, do you think, is that a response to what you just mentioned, Liz, of like, Are they seeing the slowdown out in 2023 as well too, thinking, gosh, we need to get ahead of that. We probably should go ahead and get a little leaner on labor. Is this that kind of turning point, especially maybe from the tech side, away from this growth mentality into more of a value mentality? Or I don't know, those are a couple examples more in the big tech space that's grabbing a lot of headlines these days. Or do you think that's something different going on there?
Yeah, well, it has been a long time since I was managing the financials for Meta, i.e. never. That's maybe a poor joke, but it's all to say that, like, I'm not in these companies. And so it's hard for me to know exactly what their balance sheet looks like. But, what I will say is that those big layoffs, to your point, are concentrated in very large industry specific companies that have never had a lean year. And I don't know the specifics of those financials, but what I can say is that a lot of the job openings that are still out there that people are trying hard to fill, and what we're hearing anecdotally is not, I'm ready to let people go. It's like, I still need to get people in the door. Most of the job openings that are sort of still open, like really big companies, have actually slowed their hiring a bit, as you're noting. But small businesses, less than 250, are still really starved for talent. And you might think that there's an opportunity in those big layoffs, right, for smaller businesses to get some really great talent that otherwise, right, maybe wouldn't have thought of them, right? So there's also an opportunity in that, right, for businesses, I think, that are really looking to like find people who, want to do great work and who have, really great skills.
I think the metric that I remember jumping out to me at Gustonomics was, I guess it was the number of job openings compared to unemployed. And it was at the time 2. Is that still?
It's still 2.
It's still 2.
It's
okay, so
still
there it is.
Yeah.
It's still 2. So in that case, you're right. It hasn't really, the problem still exists of there's way more job openings today than there are for qualified people to take them. So interesting.
Yeah.
How, I guess, talking in current topics, like, and you're in DC, right? Is that where you're located?
Yeah, home sweet home.
Center of everything. What are things like, more in general? I don't know if you can speak to this round of midterm elections and some of the changes that happen, or just in general. Is that something that you have to factor into your data as a team of like, wow, changing political landscape? And will the changes that came in the midterm, is there anything that you're expecting to come out of this now that, I guess, the Senate flipped?
Other than gridlock.
Yeah. I don't know. Anything that you expect, or is it like, no, this is just the way that, I'm a DC resident. This is the way it always is. It's always chaotic and crazy, and you just kind of write it off? Or do you have to think about those implications of election cycles and politics in some of your analysis?
Yeah, a great question that I definitely am sweating a little to answer, to be honest. I mean, DC is a very particular place, and a lot of DC life, right, revolves around like who's in the majority and who's in the minority, and what did so and so say. From an economics perspective, it's true that the laws we make and the rules we set about the economy affect, right, like the lives of real people. That's why it's such high stakes. The thing is, it's something that I would say that we keep a very close eye on with our policy and advocacy folks. But we think through like what are the possible ramifications and how do we prepare for that. But also, laws take a while to get implemented, right? So it almost never happens that Congress passes a law and then the next day, right, something happens. And also, the stated objectives of politicians don't translate cleanly to like a law that gets written once it's been, mulched through committee and negotiation and then has to get implemented. So I think my answer is yes. And, around DC, like that's a lot of the conversation, but like on my team and from an economics perspective, it's something that we need to be mindful of when we're thinking about what the implications are. But, things don't happen like the next day, right after these elections happen.
More importantly, since you're in DC, Kenji and I both want to know if you'll keep tabs on our children. Mine is at University of Maryland and his is at American.
That's true.
So have you be monitoring them for the next 3.5 years. That'd be great.
Oh my
That'd
gosh,
be
yeah.
that'd be awesome.
Okay. Hopefully you've put like a little tracker in their phone and you'll just send me the coordinates.
I'll send you the coordinates and you tell me how bad
How bad
it
is it?
has to
Oh,
how
No,
bad is
like
it for
that is
me.
a very seedy bar. I will tell
right,
you, I'll be like,
right.
that is a very seedy bar that they are in.
My
You
son
should call
Sam
to
just
get
got
them
off
out
at this
here.
metro stop. That's
Yeah,
is that a
Tipton and
good
Sam just went nuts with
Yeah,
okay.
you never
So
know.
I
Well, I want to before we finish up, we start rating beers, I guess. I am so appreciative of this conversation, and it's really cool for me to be able to hear you present at Gusto Next and go, wow, this is amazing. And now I get to have a conversation with you. But I think this is really what accountants and firm owners should expect. And when we look at the economy explained that Gusto's putting out and you guys are putting out, that's a great tool for people to have in their hands. So how is that going to work? Like, talk a little bit about, I mean, this is relatively new, but can you just, for folks who are listening, go, okay, how do I get to access this information? How often does it come out? Like, what is it? How does it come out? Like, what can happen with it?
how should we use it?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Thanks for setting me up to talk about one of my favorite initiatives right now. That's so kind of you. Yeah, so we actually launched the Economy Explained at Gusto Next, and what the Economy Explained is a quarterly release for accountant partners of it's a one pager and a video to sort of say, hey, this is what's going on in the economy right now. Here are the key metrics that we are watching and why, and that we think you ought to be watching to think about what they mean for the businesses that you serve or for your own business, right? And we're also releasing like a one pager of that data, so that accountants can print that out and have conversations, their like quarterly planning or their annual planning conversations with their clients. We've heard a lot, like you said, Kenji, like you get questions like this all the time from clients, like what's going on? How do I plan for this? And they don't have, I don't think you have an accountant on staff, right? Despite the fact I think you have a great team.
Yeah.
And like I said, the big four, like KPMG, Deloitte, all these places, they can afford this economic intelligence. And in fact, the fact that they have huge teams of economists to do this means that like it impacts those decisions.
Yeah.
And, what we really wanted to do is help accountants have those conversations in a really easy, digestible way where we're not just being like, the interest rates are up and the terminal rate will be 6% next year, which it won't, that nobody's forecasting that. But like really to bring that down to the level of like, this is what that means for a business that is trying to plan. This is the 3-month sort of outlook for us based on that data. So we're going to be releasing it quarterly. It's on the accountant resources page, and we are going to be releasing the next one to get on a quarterly schedule at the end of January. So like after all the nutso of, end of year closeout and all that stuff.
The crazy
and then
pants.
actually like all the crazy pants of the holidays, which I think are pretty busy times for accountants. Then we'll be getting on a quarterly schedule, and also we'll be expanding to do industry level data, which we're working on right now. And we will also be expanding to do geographies. So like we'll be giving you like the labor situation in like Chicago or Columbus or, Atlanta or Austin, right? Wherever accountants are, so that they can have more direct, more informed conversations so that they look better for their clients, right? So that they can give the answers that their clients are asking for. So like they can show up in a way they want to show up.
That's awesome. I think it's just a huge tool for us to all have. And I think for those of us who've been doing advisory work for a long time, I think others who are be trying to kind of get into those types of conversations more readily. It's just a great tool. And I think anything that's got, Matthew and I are always obsessed with anything you can do on a regular cadence like that and build that in as an expectation with clients. And knowing that we can look forward to getting that and getting those insights from you and the Gustonomics team each quarter is going to be awesome. And so hope we get a lot of folks who listen to this and get signed up and make sure they go check that out on the partner resources side. But before we let you out of here and get ready for our Thanksgiving coming up here on us, let's rate some beers. And let me pull up our exciting rating tool here. Hold on, let me screen share this.
While he's doing that, you've inspired me with the all the Gusto naming. I think we should have one for Acuity. So it'd be like I think our people's kids, we should call acuities.
Acuities. Well, Gusto is good about it here. I heard you mention like, a Gustomer, Gustomers, and
I know, but I think we should
get-
call like all of our employees' kids. I think they should be acuities.
I love that. I think, Matt, I think you're onto something.
I think it depends on the day and time with my children. I mean, there's sometimes, yes, I'll call them that. There's just too many.
Well, not
times
our
where-
kids. Our kids
not
are
our
way
kids.
past
They're
cuties.
teenagers. They're college
So
students.
they're teenagers and college students. Like
we typically have
lots of
different names for
baby's
them.
though getting born lately.
That's
so
true.
It's
We got a lot of babies coming up.
I feel like for your college kids, you could definitely use this strategically, like when, boyfriends and girlfriends and like romantic partners come home for the holidays. And be like, how's my little acuity?
Oh,
that's always, we'll always take more ways to embarrass them. Always.
Dude, I can't see your screen.
You can't see it? It's not showing up?
No, but it's probably just mine. But hopefully
Can you see it, Liz? No?
No, it's fine. Just tell us
I'll
what
try
to
it
do.
one more time.
Just a
One
blank
more time. If
screen.
this doesn't work, we'll just do it from off the fly here. Let's try one more time. Nothing? No
Just
love?
a fail.
Not
Just go,
wanting to
go,
work.
dude.
We'll just go and do
Just-
them. Yeah,
just-
we'll go them off the fly. I'm giving mine. It was okay. It was fair. I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5. This was the, again, Chant Lager. Matthew, how about you?
The Stone Imperial Stout, I'm going 4.25. It's pretty solid.
He
Pretty
likes that.
solid beer. 10.5%. It's just what the doctor ordered going into the weekend. So,
Okay.
One of those.
4 to 5 or 4.25?
4.25. is
Okay.
what
4.25. Okay, Liz, even though we know you're more of a bourbon drinker, how would you rate this IPA you're drinking?
So, the thing is, I'm not even like a hoppy person, but I really enjoyed this. So because it is defying my expectations about an IPA for a non-IPA drinker, I'm going to give it a 4.5. I think it was very drinkable, very approachable, like fantastic beer for a non-IPA person.
That's awesome. I'm a non-IPA person too, so now I'm intrigued.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We may have to see if we can get our hands on some of that down here as well too. But next time we do this, and maybe we'll wait till another one of the releases of quarters, we'll come back and we'll do this with a bourbon.
Oh yeah,
because
we
Matt and I are both
should do
bourbon
this in
drinks.
January with bourbon. January
Oh, I like
bourbon
that.
when
Yeah.
we need to know how
We
bad
could
it
do
is in Q4.
Yeah, we'll make a little crazy pants meter and we'll just sort of like, how crazy pants is it?
Is
Where
it
are we
like
currently?
Woodford Reserve or is it like Happy Van Winkle?
Happy Whoa, whoa.
we just need to know. We can have the scale and then we
could.
can rate our bourbons too.
We could,
So.
all kinds of new ways we're planning to do this. But Liz, we are super grateful you're on. We really appreciate you being here. So thank you for that. And thanks for all who are listening. Feel free to drop some questions out there to us. We'll pass them along to Liz. Liz, anywhere that people can reach out to you directly?
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn and you can also send an email to gustonomics@gusto.com.
Oh, nice.
And if you are on Gusto Connect, I am also in Gusto Connect, so you can catch me there too.
Nice. Perfect. All right, everyone. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Don't forget to subscribe and drop some comments, and we'll see you next time here on Drink While You Think. Cheers, everyone.